Good morning, everybody. Welcome back, our regular Friday people, and welcome to our new Friday morning group. I am Shannon. I'm the interim arts and heritage educator at the Langley Centennial Museum. We have the pleasure of Lindsay joining us today, who I won't put on the spot, but I'm actually covering Lindsay's job. So I've mentioned this a couple times past Fridays. I'm just interim, which means I'm just covering somebody else's role at the Langley Museum. So I have the pleasure of overseeing tons and tons of school programs, and I get to engage with you guys on Friday mornings this year, which is fantastic. And then hopefully Lindsay will take over this little segment next year as well, because we love what Learn Fort Langley is doing. So keeping with our theme, so my friends, a few weeks ago, we started this Langley Then and Now. We talked about school, we talked about learning, we talked about playtime, we talked about household chores, and then a Haley suggestion last week, because we were talking about making butter. So today we're going to talk about how food and kitchens have changed from the pioneer families to today. If you have a question, you can put up your hand and I'll try to see you and unmute you. We've got a few little videos that I found on YouTube to share with you. And then at the end, I would love to hear, so those who were here last week, we spent the week thinking, is there any food that we're making at home with our families? So if any of you did that this week, I'd love to hear from you at the end as well. Okay, my friends, so today we're going to talk about food. So first of all, we talked about this last week and a little bit the week before. Let us think about some food-related tools that we depend on today. So let's think. We talked about getting up in the morning, how we, maybe make our coffee, how we get food out of the fridge. So the most common thing that we all depend on every single day in our kitchen is the refrigerator. So back 100 or 200 years ago, especially the pioneer families that we've talked about, they didn't have fancy refrigerators in their house. They weren't able to just go get their yogurt and their milk and fix up a bowl of cereal just as easily as we can today. So what you're seeing in front of you, my friends, is an example of a modern day refrigerator, one from the 1950s. So they look about the same. They're like just, in the 50s, we had more fun colors. But they've got power. They run on a gas called Freon, which was invented about 70 years ago. And that's something that keeps your fridge cold. But the pioneer families didn't have that. So the pioneer families, either if they happen, the families with a little bit more money, maybe the working class families, had what you see on there. This is 1920s on the left, which is the start of the electric ice boxes. So that's when we started to get some power to our fridge. They still had ice in them, but there was an electric fan that blew all of the cold air down into the compartment that kept your food fresh. Now on the right-hand side, that hand-drawn one is an old-fashioned ice box. So when we talked about the pioneer families, about having very limited resources, having to make do with what they had, most of those families couldn't afford the brand new Sears catalog electric ice box. So we just had our conventional ice box, which literally had ice in there. So we had some block of ice, and that's how we kept the food cold. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of a video that I found online that will help kind of give you a better idea of how those ice boxes work.
So Deanna, tell me a little bit about ice and how it would have been stored, how it would have been collected here in the early 19th century.
Well, along about January, you're going to wait until the ponds have frozen up very thick enough to support the weight of a horse. And you're going to start preparing your ice, clearing it off of any snow, dividing it up, and then you're going to cut it into blocks.
So do you know about how big the blocks were?
It depends on how thick your ice is.
Right.
So that will be variable. They seem to be about 18 inches by 18 inches.
And they were sawing,
and then however deep.
Right, and they'd saw up these blocks of ice as it was sitting right there in the lake. So they'd have this kind of open pit, and they would be working along the side of it, sawing these great big blocks of ice.
Absolutely, right. Just right, standing over it, and then as soon as you get sawn They tip it off. They're going to take some hooks and haul it out of the water up a ramp, and then put it onto a wagon and take it to their ice house.
So tell me about the ice house. We've got an ice house right behind us here. What's a construction of an ice house in the early 19th century like?
Well, they have very, very thick walls, usually insulated with sawdust or straw, sometimes brick, and they keep things cold for a very long time once it's packed full.
So you're packing your ice house in January, in February. You're filling up your ice house,
yes,
and you're probably starting to use that ice as soon as it gets warm, right?
Yes.
Maybe June and July. You're starting to use that ice. How long is it going to last?
Well, it will last actually quite through the warm weather, at least.
So maybe into September. Maybe you're using the last little bit. One of those last hot days in September. We're going to make ice cream, right?
Ice cream
with the
some
last
nice
little bit.
Lemonade. Yes. It'll
Amazing.
be wonderful.
I really want to thank Deanna for showing us this ice house, for telling us about what she knows about early 19th century ice collection and its use in household situations. They're using it for all these different things. So thank you so much, Deanna.
Okay, my friends. So that gives us an idea about how they collected the ice, because at the museums, each time we talk about refrigeration, that's the first question we get is, where did all of that ice come from? So we talk about ice boxes, how we had to keep things cold, but we don't have ice sitting around in our backyards in July and August. So that's an example of how the pioneer families all across North America were able to get the ice. They actually cut it out, saved it in sheds that were specially built for that throughout the summer. And then as time went on, they also had the option of getting ice delivered right to their door from local companies as well. So that took some of the work out of the pioneers. Okay, my friends, if we're thinking about our morning routines, or maybe when we get home from school, most of us go straight to the microwave to maybe heat up a little bit of our leftover lunch, or heat up a pizza pop or a snack. Now, let's think for a second, what would we do if we didn't have a microwave? Just want you to all think about that for a second. Put up your hand if you use the microwave today. Still pretty early. Yeah, okay, half of you. Oh, most of you. Okay, hands down. Put up your hand if you can think about how many times you used your microwave yesterday, if you know. And then show me with your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. None. Riley didn't use the microwave at all? Awesome. So lots of us, I mean, even myself, I use the microwave all the time. I just used it before this call to heat up my coffee. So the microwaves, my friends, weren't introduced until the 1950s. If you look on your left there, there's an image of the lady with a baby. That's one of the very first microwaves. But that first microwave was sold for the equivalent of $11,000. So my friends, think about how much money is that? That's almost as much as a car. So that is a pretty big expense. Now on the right-hand side, we've just got an example of what a microwave looks like today. We all know what that looks like. Oh, Lacey, it looks beautiful where you are. Lacey's out enjoying the sunshine. Now, on the note of cooking, stoves did not always look the same either. So we often hear that stoves are the healthier way of cooking food, but they're also a bit slower and they take up a lot of power. So we can see here an example of an electric stove today, one about 70 years ago. So electric stoves have been around for at least my lifetime and my parents' lifetime, and probably your grandparents' lifetime too. But before that, we had wood stoves. So the old-fashioned stoves of the pioneers ran on gas or wood. And at our museum, we've got a great wood stove that hopefully we can show you when we reopen. So the wood stove looked a lot like this. There was a spot in the bottom where you could actually put the wood and you'd burn it like a campfire. And that heat would go up into your top of the stove and help you cook. There's also a compartment for water. So the water would get heated up as well, and that steam would help cook everything too. So we're just going to take a quick look back now at an example of a 1920s kitchen. So this is like the video we saw last week, but it shows you a little bit more about how the pioneer families had to use their kitchens, which were very different from today.
Hello, and welcome to the Rice County Historical Society. My name is Liz Kramer, and today I'm going to be showing you a 1920s style farm kitchen. A farm kitchen would have had no electricity or traditional indoor plumbing, and some of the elements of the kitchen may be familiar, while others are foreign to us now. There is a telephone in this 1920s kitchen because many farm homes had telephones long before they had electricity. Cupboard space in the kitchen is provided by a Hoosier cabinet, which is a style of furnishing that was very popular in the early 20th century. There's a coffee mill to grind the coffee beans by hand. And to dry your hands, there's a continuous roller towel by the sink. And the sink would not have had running water. The dirty water would empty into a bucket under the sink cabinet. Drinking and cooking water would be brought into the kitchen in a pail from the well outside. And water for washing up and things would come from rainwater collected and pumped up by the cistern pump. This water would not have been used for drinking or cooking. Kerosene lamps were used to provide light in the kitchen, and the kitchen would have a wood-burning cook range. Cooking and baking were done here year-round, and water was often heated here as well, especially in the winter. While the wood-burning range warmed the kitchen in the winter, it could really heat up the kitchen in the summer. So sometimes a small kerosene stove was used instead, and the cooktop became more counter space until the weather cooled off. The stove was greatly appreciated in the winter, although you did have to constantly fuel it with wood, coal, or corn cobs, and the reservoir had to be refilled with water from the well. I hope you enjoyed this chance to step into a traditional farm-style kitchen from the 1920s.
Okay, so now that we've looked at some kitchen appliances, let's go back to actually talking about food. So now we have a better sense of, you know what? Kitchens still existed. Pioneer families had big kitchens, big families. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how many kids would have been in one of those pioneer families. Put your hand up if you have a brother or sister. Yeah? Okay. Lacey, how many brothers or sisters do you have? Can you show me a number? One. And Lincoln, how about you? Do you have one brother or one sister? You guys probably have pretty small families, right? McKinley and Jackson, do you have any more brothers or sisters, or is it just the two? Just the two of you. So those pioneer families often had up to 8, 9, or even 10 children. So they had big kitchens. But things took a little bit longer because we didn't have fancy microwaves or big fridges. But there was more people around to help out with all of these chores too. That's part of the reason why they always wanted to have such big families too. Now, those pioneer families, just like many of our families in the Fraser Valley today, were farmers. A lot of the food they ate is very similar to what we eat today because it comes from the same place. So the type of food that we can grow in our farms today, for the most part, they were able to grow 100 years ago too. The big difference is that their diet was simpler. So where we might have, you know, some fancy scalloped potatoes that maybe came out of a box, theirs was fresh potatoes that they came from their farm and just cut up. Sometimes, like I had a mango smoothie this morning. That would not have been an option. Those mangoes have to travel halfway around the world to get to our table. So they had a lot of fresh food, but nothing imported, nothing store-bought. Everything came from the farm. So they would provide food for themselves and share with their neighbors or trade with some of the neighboring farms. Some of the common foods that they ate in the spring and summer were fresh fruit and vegetables right off the farm, fresh farm meat. So it would be cooked, but it wouldn't be out of cans or dried. Like they could actually go butcher and cook for that night. And eggs would be very common in the summer as well from all of the chickens that they would have in the farm. In the fall and the winter, there was a lot of dried fruit. So especially apples were quite easy to dry, and they could snack on those dried apples year-round. Root vegetables, so things like carrots, onions, potatoes. Sometimes even apples could be stored in the root cellar. I know my mom has a farm in southern BC, and she talks about having fresh apples all the way up to November because she has a way of packaging up those apples that she grows in her trees and keeping them. She wraps them in newspaper, I think, and she keeps them in a very dark cellar for several months and then they're still fresh in the wintertime. And then any of the farm meat that they would have would be preserved. So preserved means saved. So they would be salted or dried or canned. They would eat things like salted pork, sausages, smoked ham. And if they did have any fresh meat that they would cook for dinner, it would come from hunting. So things that they could find easily in the Fraser Valley in wintertime, like ducks or geese, or sometimes snow hares, so rabbits. And then year round, you could have bread that you would make fresh in your home, milk, cheese, and butter. We talked a little bit about making butter last week too. So now what about waste? So we're thinking, okay, I know sometimes I'm so careful about waste. I recycle and I compost everything I possibly can. But you're going to the store, you're getting something in a package. Well, that package can't always be recycled. I know as much as I try because I live by myself, sometimes food in my fridge spoils. Sometimes I have to throw something out because I can't eat it before it goes bad. So now in the early days, nothing was wasted. There wasn't a lot of money to go around, but they were also much more creative about making sure that every scrap of food could go somewhere else on the farm. So I just have one last very short video to share with you, and then we'll share some of your experiences before we end.
Nothing was wasted, ever. When a chicken or a hog or a cow was butchered, nearly every ounce was used. Meat from a hog was chopped and ground, odd pieces made into sausage, hams prepared for curing. The carcass also yielded pickled pig's feet, and also head cheese and rendered lard. At mealtime, children were taught only to take on their plates what could be eaten. Anything left in the pans and bowls was stored for another meal. In those days, families couldn't afford to turn up their noses at leftovers.
In the Depression, you knew the value of $1. If you had $1, boy, you had something. You could buy a couple of meals with $1, you know, and you could buy a sack of candy for 5 or 10 cents, and money would buy a lot of things.
Wasting water was a sin too, especially during years of drought. The typical kitchen either had a small pump leading to a cistern, or a water bucket with a dipper was brought to the house for drinking, for cooking, and for washing dishes. And considering the trouble it took to get water to the house, bath time only came around once a week, except in the hot, sticky summer. Early on Saturday nights, before the family went to town to trade, water was heated for the baths, and the children went first, and then more hot water was added to the same bath water so Mother could take her turn. And finally, since Father was usually the dirtiest, he bathed last in the same water.
We just kind of laugh, and we always think of our parents, of how gross that had to be for them, you know. And the older you got, the worse it would be, you know, because there would be another person in front of you. But, you know, at the time, it didn't seem one bit unusual or strange.
Sharing bathwater would be hard to swallow today, but once a family had experienced drought, water was not taken for granted. And perhaps that's why so many persons raised in the 30s and 40s are still so careful to wonder if the food would last all winter, or if the well would keep going all summer.
It makes you thrifty. You probably noticed that in people of my age bracket. They stop and think every time they let loose of a dime. You know, it's not that they won't spend money, but they like to get their money's worth and be sure there's a good reason for buying stuff as compared to some of our offspring that figure that money is going to corrode if it lays around in their billfold over a couple of days.
Because the session is being recorded and shared, I just do need to say that Langley Centennial Museum does not take credit for any of these videos. These are publicly available on YouTube, and I have made sure that the credit is available in the video so that you can go to those other great learning sites and see more of their videos. Now, we are just about at time, but I would love to hear, since it's such a small group, each of you just take 1 second and think. Either share something you made in your kitchen from scratch this week, or something in your kitchen you know that you cannot live without? So just take a second, think about that, and then I'm going to start with Lacey, and then I'll go around. And hi, Lexi, thanks for joining us. Okay. So, Lacey, either what did you make this week, or what can you not live without in your kitchen?
I made cookies this week, and I helped my mom bake bread on the weekend. So.
Amazing. That sounds delicious. Thanks for sharing, Lacey. And Riley, is there something that you made in the kitchen this week? Or is there something that you can't live without?
Well, there were just, fruit. Nobody can live without fruit. It's very good for you.
You're right, it is good for you. And you know what? In the pioneer days, even something simple like an orange was not easy to find in the winter.
Also vegetables.
Vegetables. What's your favorite vegetable, Riley?
Tomatoes.
That's my favorite too. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Riley. Lincoln, how about you? Did you make anything in the kitchen this week?
No, not really. But
okay.
What you can't really live without in the kitchen is milk.
Milk, yeah. And imagine if you had to go to your cow and milk every day because you didn't have a fridge to keep it in. That would be pretty tough, huh? Thanks for sharing, Lincoln. And McKinley and Jackson.
Something I couldn't live without is probably agadashi tofu.
I love spicy agadashi tofu. And how about Jackson? Did you help Mom make anything in the kitchen this week?
We made pizza.
Oh, delicious.
We made the dough.
Nice.
The toppings on.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Before I go to Lexi, Lindsay, feel free to unmute if you're still at your camera or your mic and you want to share something. We'd love to include you as well. Otherwise, I will assume you're off with your baby. Okay, off to Lexi.
We made pizza.
Pizza. Did you make the dough from scratch?
No, but we added all the toppings and stuff. Right?
Nice. And let's see, what's the one kitchen appliance that you think you cannot live without?
Probably.
Fridge, yeah.
Although this week we have left our freezer open twice, so clearly we have mixed feelings on whether or not we actually need a freezer.
Oh no, it's a long story, but I accidentally unplugged their deep freeze once and we didn't know. Well, it was routed through a weird place and I didn't think I was unplugging the deep freeze. Anyway, we went away and came back 3 weeks later to find a pool of what was melted berries on our garage floor. Because everything had thawed and then leaked through the deep freeze. It was a big disaster. Okay, my friends, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much. And now off to Haley.
Awesome. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for our Zoom with Langley Centennial Museum. It's very cool learning about food and where it comes from. And it's actually really interesting because with the fort this morning, we had a lot of the similar conversations about how they did, how they managed food at the fort. So I will post both of these videos. So I will post these videos this evening. Thank you so much for joining.